Thank you for joining us for the April edition of Business and Arts Speaker Series. This month's session is not live because we are currently in the midst of our annual Canadian Arts Summit. Because of that, we are able to present this special one-off crossover with the summit. We all know that the arts sector has been one of the hardest hit by the pandemic, with 35% of jobs lost, and will likely be among the last industries to fully reopen and recover. In this context, we felt it was important to share more widely the session in which Nichole Anderson Bergeron moderates a discussion on advocacy for the arts from the federal to municipal level. The session starts off with Sean Casey from Global Public Affairs, who updates us on the relief efforts found in the April 19th federal budget. Subsequently, we hear from Municipal Arts Council representatives from major cities across Canada, who share their unique struggle in their regions. They also touch on the work they have been doing to help their communities remain resilient and their united call for a guaranteed basic income. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their participation in this Canadian Arts Summit session, as well as thank our speaker series presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada, and supporting partner, Manulife. The Canadian Arts Summit is a yearly conference organized by Business and Arts in partnership with the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. This year, the summit partners are Franklin Templeton, Manulife, Woodbridge, and Molson Coors Beverage Company. Many thanks and enjoy.
Hi, it's Nichole Anderson Bergeron. Bonjour, bienvenue. We are going to have a discussion now on advocacy in the state of the arts in Canada. Clearly, this has been one of the most, if not the most challenging years all of you have faced in the arts. We have seen 35% of jobs disappear for the sector in Canada. Employment in the arts has fallen more than any other sector. So we have been hit hard, and there has been no better time and more important time for all of us to rally and have very strong advocacy for the sector. So on that front, it's a real pleasure to welcome Sean Casey. I know everybody knows Sean and Tara and the team at Global Public Affairs extremely well, and you have been so helpful for the sector through this, and just a voice of steadiness and calm and real effectiveness also at the federal level and all levels. So I'm going to throw the virtual podium over to you, Sean, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Nichole, and again, thank you to Business for the Arts, our Canadian Arts Summit, for this opportunity. It is somewhat sad that, first and foremost, having some connection issues in a lovely area in La Pêche, Quebec, which is great for scenery, not so great for internet. I'm going to carry the ball for the presentation today, and again, we always appreciate the opportunity to appear before the Arts Summit. I look back a year ago, we were supposed to be in Banff, and always look forward to the opportunity in any platform, virtual or otherwise, to connect with all these important stakeholders within the arts sector. So on that note, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview here on where things are at in terms of federal advocacy as you do work in presentations that we have done, especially in relation to the budget. As Nichole mentioned, this has been a very important time for the sector. And again, the impacts of which have been recognized by the federal government. If we go back to a $500 million fund that was created by Minister Guilbeault back in the spring of 2020, followed by $181.5 million in the fall economic state, with their number $1.5 in new supports that will into the sector out of this budget. So again, it is significant investment by this government into the sector, realizing that we were the first impacted and we will be the last out in terms of recovery. So what do some of these broad supports look like? The minister who was joined the summit a few hours ago did go into some detail on some of these. Again, one of the biggest areas of supports have been what I call pandemic-related supports that are more globally available. The wage subsidy, the rent subsidy. In the budget, those have been extended to September. There is the potential, according to Minister Freeland, to extend those to November via regulation. I think a lot of that will depend on how the pandemic continues to play out as various regions across the country ride the third wave. And again, some areas of the country are getting hit much harder than others. Coming out of this program, there will be a creation of a new Canada Recovery Hiring Program. This is to support the return to programming for a lot of our arts organizations. This will allow for a top-up to bring those who are on part-time status up to full-time status, and those who have been furloughed or laid off an opportunity to come back and try to accommodate the requirements for staff coming forward. Again, on the EI front, they are looking at some more global changes, legislative ones to make them more accessible and simple for those who are coming forward. That had inconsistencies in terms of reliable benefits to workers in the seasonal industries, and that includes those in the arts sector. They're going to be launching public consultations with charities in the coming months, which would increase the distribution quota and probably generate close to $1 billion of new revenues into the system. So these are more systemic wide, outside of the arts and heritage umbrella, that many of the organizations that are part of the summit have been interacting with. Looking at the sector specifically and digging down a little bit deeper on some of the investments that have been made by this government, I think the most important one, and the minister alluded to it in his conversation, is this recovery fund for arts, heritage, culture, and sport. $300 million over 2 years, starting in this year. I think you're going to see a lot of similarities in the delivery mechanisms to what was done with the $500 million back in the spring in terms of through existing programs. The overall terms and metrics, I know a lot of organizations received up to a 25% top up back in the spring. Again, it's going to be working through the terms and conditions and what this type of investment can support. Again, it works out to a little bit higher in the first year than in the second. But again, there is a metric here that those who have received recovery dollars in the past via the spring program will most likely be in good shape and alignment to try to receive some of these new funding dollars over the next 2 years. Some of the existing programs, I talk about the Building Community through Arts and Heritage Program, Canada Arts Presentation Fund that many of your organizations access. These were originally topped up to their respective amounts in budget 2019, along with the Canada Music Fund. They have been extended. I know that they have not been extended permanently, only temporarily for 2-year periods. So in essence, from that original budget 2019 investment, there have been 5 one-year investments that will allow for those increases to continue to the 2022-23 window. There is also an increase over the next 3 years into the Celebration and Commemoration Program. This is to celebrate significant anniversaries and milestones of your organizations. And it is a pot that is accessed a fair bit based on whatever metrics and milestones your organizations are reaching. For the Canada Music Fund, I did mention that there is an investment as a portion of this to continue and extend the budget 2019 commitments. But for this calendar year, there will be an additional $50 million to support the live music sector. The terms and conditions on how that is going to be rolled out are to be determined by the department in the coming weeks and months. The Canada Cultural Spaces Fund, $15 million this year. And again, this is to recover off some of the recovery costs associated with the return to production to keep organizations in alignment with public health measures. There are going to be, no doubt, PPE requirements, various plexiglass requirements, spacing requirements. And this fund is to help alleviate some of those line items that nobody expected to have in part of the return to regular production that will take place over the course of the next year. And of course, there was also an additional investment in the Canada book industry to help increase online sales. So there's a little bit in everyone's pot in terms of additional supports coming out of this budget. One area that the minister's office has been very keen to extend is outside of the traditional Canadian heritage envelope. And this is where your regional development agencies will start to come into play. A $200 million investment through those agencies to support major festivals. This is in alignment with an old program that was in place about 10 years ago, though, called the Marquis Tourism Events Program. And it really highlighted support for festivals, a broad range of them that had significant attendance. And of course, they're looking at those attendances in the pre-COVID periods, significant number of days of involvement and significant revenue generation. They will be sort of streamed into this major festival category, but not to forget some of the small festivals, community cultural events, outdoor theater performances. There will be additional $200 million that will flow through Canadian Heritage to support those. So there will be two tourism-based streams, regional development agencies and Canadian Heritage, where there will be ample opportunities to, I think, for organizations that are looking to return to programming to get that additional support via another stream. There is also a $500 million tourism relief fund that will be administered through the development agencies. That is more to support some of the ancillary activities related to hospitality related activities, tour packages, for example, which again may drive ticket sales on the return to many of the programs that are going to be involved. And then again, an additional investment in Destination Canada to help those Canadians and other visitors, when they're able to travel and come back to Canada, have this country as a destination of choice and have the arts and culture that we present as a venue of choice to return to. So again, this is a great outline. And if you look back at those numbers, you will note that in addition to highlighting all of the numbers, I also highlighted the terms. Again, as Minister Guilbeault alluded to, these are 2 to 3 year investments, and there are significant challenges related to those. If you look at all of those investments, and I've put the supporting Canadian arts, heritage, and cultural workers, so that's all of the investments primarily targeted at the traditional arts and culture sector that members of the Canadian Arts Summit are part of. You will see how these play out versus what is going into the book sector, what is going into the audiovisual sector, what's going to be used to support tourism. And the narrative here is how this is going to trend down to 2023. These numbers, when you first look at them, are significant investments. But as you can see, in almost every area, there's a significant drop. And that by the third year of this, you're looking at an investment base of $850 million going down to just $117 million, of which a vast majority of that is into the audiovisual sector. So again, it's going to be looking at some of these investments and trying to answer the question, what comes next? One of those areas of the what comes next is the strategic direction of the Canada Council, which they launched a couple of weeks back. Again, I won't go into great detail on this because, again, you had between Jesse and Simon, two of the experts on the program funding that is available for the Canada Council. But again, the importance of the direction that they are going with, they did receive a significant investment through the fall economic statement, about $116 million, the investment in digital. And again, how are they moving forward over the next 5 years to reimagine some of their investment options in the rebuilding and innovation space, amplifying the benefits of arts and society, and then nurturing and expanding the collaborations and partnerships that are available between stakeholders and the council itself. So what does this all mean going forward? I was tempted to call this presentation short-term gain for long-term pain. And this is not to diminish any of the investments that this government has made, but the realization that in 2 years' time, maybe 3 at the outside, we are going to be coming to a situation where there have been significant investments that have been made into the cultural sector that are short-term investments. And again, I assume that a lot of the arts organizations that are around the table are going to be working very closely to maximize those investments over the short term. But one of the problems that we faced when we went into COVID is the fact that there was upwards of 8 government programs that had full 5-year reviews, and almost all of them had seen recommendations for ongoing permanent investments. The COVID crisis has unfortunately parked that on the sidelines, and we really do need to look at going forward what those investments will be to try to offset some of the investments that are going to be made to help, as to use a Liberal campaign slogan, build back better. How are we going to do that if we don't have, at the end of the day, the supports out of the great things that we'll build back in the next 2 to 3 years on a platform that we can utilize? On the plus side, in terms of the budget itself, it passed a couple of major hurdles, the biggest one being on Monday, where it passed. There will be a budget implementation bill that will come in place. There is no appetite right at the moment to do anything that will vote down the budget. So the expectation is that this budget will pass before the summer recess through the House and the Senate. And those programs will start to be rolled out most likely in the late summer, early fall period. The biggest question I always get asked on these calls is an election. Is there an election coming? When is it going to happen? We're in a minority mandate. Most minority governments last between 12 to 18 months. We hit the 18-month mark this month. So I always like to say every month after this, we're working on borrowed time. I can't see a scenario where there is not going to be an election that'll take place before the end of the calendar year. And again, what will it look like? There is an opportunity here. We've spent a lot of time focusing on budgets. I think our focus now primarily goes to party platforms. I think we have an idea what a Liberal government re-elected would look like. But again, a lot of it will depend on the strength of that government. A majority government can do a lot more than a minority government. And if it's a minority government, you've also got to look at those partners that they have around the table, the Bloc, the NDP. The only other option on the table is if it's a conservative government. And I think a conservative government, you're looking at a very, very different focus on how they would view recovery writ large and recovery in the arts and culture sector. And that is going to bring its own challenges. But by all means, don't forget the Conservative Party in terms of those party platforms, understanding what they can do and understanding the dynamic of what the sector needs to develop and move on. I mentioned those programs, the program reviews. And again, I think last year, it is a situation where there are additional avenues where the government could be looking to increase their funding base. The Creative Export Strategy, their 5-year, $125 million investment comes to an end at the end of next year. So again, trying to renew and increase the investment in that fund will be critically important. Ties in very nicely to the work being done by the government, both Canadian Heritage and Global Affairs on cultural diplomacy, to try to get the investments and show the strength that we have beyond our borders. Working on those existing permanent programs and trying to bring forward permanent funding solutions that we can piggyback on the great investments that are going to be coming back to get us ready to go out of the investment. And the last point I'll make on this, permanent marketplace solutions. Government is always looking for those solutions that will come, that doesn't come out of the government coffers. We look at areas such as copyright, broadcasting. There's a broadcasting bill before the House. If that bill passes, and they're attempting to do it before the summer, Minister Guilbeault has been very clear that the investment into the arts and culture sector will be an additional $830 million a year. It will be coming not from the government, but from the marketplace solutions. So again, there is a situation here where we have opportunities that are going to present themselves in the coming years in that 2022-23 window that we really look forward to working with all of you in the Canadian Arts Summit to try to make sure that we have a strong advocacy platform to piggyback and build on the investments this government has made. Nichole, I think that's all I've got planned.
Thank you, Sean. And that's a beautiful segue to Sarah Eiley on behalf of the Canadian Arts Coalition. Thanks for being here. And good points from Sean in thinking about what's next, as 2 years will go by in a flash and will be very important. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Nichole, and thank you, Sean. As usual, brilliantly outlined not only what we already have going for us, but what the challenges may well be ahead. Just a reminder to Summit members that the Canadian Arts Summit since 2005 has been a very fundamental part of the Canadian Arts Coalition, which brings together arts service organizations from across the country that are national in terms of their in the focus of their advocacy and their work, and also all of the members of the Canadian Arts Summit. And it's been my privilege over the past number of years to be the link between the Arts Summit advocacy that I have the privilege of chairing with Jim Fleck, and also the coalition. And last year, I have to say that I think we felt a bit like we were a bit flat-footed when the pandemic hit. There had been so much emphasis over the years to increase funding for the Canada Council that when that came through, the coalition kind of, drifted a bit, thinking about other things that it might want to be pursuing, but not really pushing terribly hard for things other than, for instance, increases to the Canadian Arts Training Fund and the Canadian Arts Presentation Fund. And then the pandemic hit, and we were sitting there going, where do we go and where do we start and what does the sector need? And I really want to thank Nichole, because Nichole said, let's work together. Let's see what we can do to really make sure that we reach into the sector and see what people are looking for. And so the coalition banded together with Business for the Arts, and we really got out there and we sent a survey out, and we had responses from 40 arts service organizations from right across the country, representing 5,900 arts, culture, and heritage organizations, and an additional 58,650 individual artists active in music, theater, dance, visual arts, crafts, filmmaking, writing, and publishing. And that really gave us the groundwork. What were people concerned about? And we put it in 3 different phases: the emergency phase, the recovery phase, and the rebuilding phase. And we also sent out a parallel survey, the exact same survey, just to Arts Summit members. We had a 20% response to that survey. So we were able to see where the alignment was between the two. And that really has shaped our advocacy throughout the year. And we have really pushed for the things that we heard the sector was looking for. Obviously, sector recovery, lots of work in terms of making sure that the wage subsidy, which was a bit clunky to begin with, and CRB, that they began to meet and really did meet the needs of those in the sector. We are continuing to work on that, and I know that it was interesting this morning. I heard one of my fellow members of the Coalition Steering Committee, Steve Bellamy's question, asking what will happen with the projected ending of the wage subsidy in September, and can it be extended? And I think all of us heard the minister's response that these are things that we can continue to talk about, and we've extended it many times depending on the circumstances. So those kinds of things are really important, that we've had a very good conversation with the minister's office throughout the year, which has really helped with those kinds of recovery situations. But we've also been looking really at not only extending income and employment support. We've been very concerned about equity and funding. And again, excellent to hear the Canada Council's presentation this morning. That's been a big push on the part of the coalition. We've also looked to support digital creation. There's no question we've moved into this era of not just digital and digital instead of live, or live instead of digital, but we really see going forward there will be a hybrid in the kind of presentation that arts organizations and artists want to participate in. And we really want to support digital creation that actually has some monetary value as well to the organizations and the artists that create them. So that's been an area. An area that we've been really pushing, that I think has been supported by the NANO surveys that Business for the Arts and the National Arts Centre have been collaborating on with the support of Irfan Raji and his wife Christine, also is the need for incentivizing private donations. And we keep looking at that. And again, this morning we heard from the minister a bit of a slippery, well, we don't think there's any particular need for that. We know it works. We've seen it works with endowment. And that's certainly an area that is something that we will continue to push for as well. But one of the biggest things that was, I think, quite astonishing when we first put out the survey of all of these art service organizations, arts organizations, and individual artists was a real desire for the government to move towards a universal basic income, a guaranteed income. And I think that's one of the things that we will continue to be pushing for, one of the things that will be very important going forward. And I think it's also very important to the panel that I'm about to throw to. And I think they will also be very happy to hear that when we asked arts organizations and artists what they felt was really important for the federal government to do, 77% of them said, can you please work with the provinces to increase municipal funding? Because municipal arts funding is core and really important, and it really gets the short end of the stick. So with that, Nichole, I'll pass it back into the panel.
Well, what a lovely segue. And when I think of Patty Pon and Sanjay Shahini and Natalie Maillet, Marielle, Claire Hawkinson, you have your ears to the ground. I think at the municipal level, you know your stakeholders, you know who their kids are, and there is that lovely local understanding of what's happening in people's lives, where their mental health is. And I think it was so lovely to see all of you, and Carol Phillips also pen an op-ed on the subject of basic income and calling for basic income for artists. And we would love to hear more on that. But to start off with Patty, who is CEO of the Calgary Arts Development, of course, maybe you can kick things off and just discuss what opportunities you see right now. Clearly, there's been devastation in the arts sector within the city of Calgary, but what opportunities do you see now as a municipal funder for a go forward for that recovery phase?
Thanks very much, Nichole, and greetings from Mohkinstsis Treaty 7 territory, which is where I'm coming to all of you from today. It's a great pleasure to be with my colleagues around this panel. I think each of us are just going to take a very brief time to talk a bit to some points that we think are around the distinction, around the participation of municipal funders coming together in a national context. More than half of the artists who live in Canada call Canada's largest cities home. So we have a critical mass of people that, to Nicole's point, we see on the ground. We see at every opening, or did see at every opening in their venues a year ago. And as we come out of this pandemic, among us, we've been talking about, and you've heard during the summit, this transformational change, that the arts sector will be fundamentally different in some way. And so by extension, as municipal level funders, and particularly public funders, it goes to say then that as funders, we will fundamentally change in terms of how we walk with the organizations and the communities that we see in our artistic homes every day, even in a pandemic, when it's about meeting in a park or being outside at a drive-in event for your activities. So that is certainly something we've talked a lot about. And in those discussions, and particularly around the op-ed you refer to, we discovered that our values, our missions are aligned. And the ability to use our collective voice, knowing the kind of inclusion and representation that we have going forward from the arts communities, and I use that plurally, was evident in terms of an action that we could take with the Globe and Mail article, and I hope is indicative of actions that we will continue to assert and take together at the national level in support of the communities and the artists that we work with most closely.
Thank you. And Nathalie, à Montréal, est-ce que c'est profond en fait ce qui arrive là, mais est-ce que vous aussi, are you also seeing change needing to happen within how you operate your funding agency?
Absolutely. We're living the same thing, all of the biggest city in Canada. Pour poursuivre un peu dans ce que disait Patty, il y a vraiment beaucoup de points qui nous unissent, les grands conseils des arts municipaux. Tout d'abord, on est des organismes arm's length, donc non gouvernemental. Et donc, notre gouvernance, elle est majoritairement composée de gens issus du milieu culturel. On a des enjeux reliés au centre-ville. On sait qu'actuellement, la plus grande crise qui se vit dans les centres-villes. Donc, on a aussi ce point en commun. En plus d'avoir des artistes issus de la diversité dans les grandes concentrations, se trouvent aussi dans les milieux urbains. On a donc cette capacité, comme on est à même, on a cette proximité-là avec les artistes, on a cette capacité d'agir rapidement et de rapporter les enjeux aux différents paliers du gouvernement. Et donc, nous connaissons très bien ce qu'on appelle nos nombreux bénéficiaires. Je ne reviendrai pas sur les chiffres que Patty a donnés pour vous donner juste un aperçu de la quantité d'artistes qu'on rejoint au niveau des conseils des arts municipaux. Donc, nos priorités sont semblables. On a développé une compréhension profonde au-delà de nos instances mutuelles de notre propre milieu et la facilité avec laquelle on peut développer des relations avec les bénéficiaires et de les rapporter à d'autres paliers. De notre point de vue, c'est extrêmement précieux et nous sommes profondément convaincus que nous sommes sous-utilisés dans cette réflexion pour la relance et pour réfléchir sur les pistes d'avenir. Et donc, nous vous disons que nous nous joignons à la table avec grand plaisir.
Et c'est super, et c'est super de voir Montréal avec Toronto et Calgary et Edmonton. C'est vraiment une bonne idée. And as you say, perhaps underutilized and leveraged as a municipal funding agency where you have that immediate contact with your stakeholders in the arts. Sanjay, being the executive director of the Edmonton Arts Council and also with your past experience running the arts portfolio for Trillium Foundation, you were very involved in strategy, obviously, with both those agencies and looking very closely at impact. And I know that's very important to you. Could you just talk a little bit about how you see or where you see you having the most impact now on a go forward?
Thank you, Nichole, and thank you all the speakers who've come before me. I think this is a significant moment. So the op-ed piece that we came together was the first time that municipal arts councils from across the country came together to actually represent, as Patty has said, more than 50% of the artists who live in this country. It's important to know that the relationships that we have, I think it's, sort of members of the summit who are here, who are actually sort of, listening to us, know that their municipal arts councils have their ear to the ground, and our relationships are not transactional. So it's not really about putting an application in and having a check come out of the other end. It really is about, sometimes being there while they're going through some difficulties, while they're going through some successes. But mostly it's about being there with them and building a long-standing relationship with them. We're always reminded because all of us, as Nathalie has actually reminded us, we have that arm's length relationship from our local government, but we also have the sort of direct relationship to the people of the cities that we live in. So it's important to understand that the kind of advocacy we do on a day-to-day basis is really about long-term change. And we are often there with our arts organizations and with our festivals and with our artists right on the ground. It's important also that we have been active in many different ways to support our arts communities through this pandemic. And part of that work is to actually gather some evidence and share that evidence with our publics, because most of our funding, most of our support comes from the tax base that is a municipal tax base. And so we want to make sure that the work that artists are doing during these very, very hard times, when they've lost so much of their income, artists have stepped up and they have done things, and dare I say, they've done things for free. Well, this kind of free stuff is not, never actually is free, and it's somebody's sweat and labor that is actually allowing people to navigate through this very awful time that we're living in. And finally, what I'd like to say and what I'd like to end with is that we have to be part of the solution. We are on the ground. We are with our artists, and we will often be able to give evidence quite directly about the conditions that plague our sort of creative workers. So that to me is real impact. But for us to have impact, we need to be at the table. Over to you, Nichole.
Thank you, Sanjay. And we hear quite a lot that the wage subsidy has been very helpful, and the CERB has been a lifeline for an artist. Claire, this moves to the basic income notion, and I wondered if you wanted to speak more about that, and also how you at the Toronto Arts Council are looking at how you can have impact as well.
Well, thank you so much, Nichole. And I just have to say, it's great to be here with you, with other colleagues from across the country, and with my municipal arts funding colleagues. So with this recent joint advocacy on the issue of basic income guarantee, distinct from universal basic income, we came together with our colleagues and stepped outside our normal advocacy initiatives. But we're not in normal times, as has been talked about so much recently, and there are opportunities in front of us. And since there are so many programs already at the federal level with regard to some kind of income supports, it does make sense to extend these programs or amalgamate them so that gig workers, including artists, are covered. I mean, it's a very simple premise. But coming together with our colleagues on this issue, we felt it to be a moral imperative to advocate for artists and the good of the sector overall. And it made us realize in talking through these issues, as others have articulated, that we have many common values, that we hear the voice of the artist literally at our doorstep, particularly from the growing representation from equity-seeking artists, listening to the new ideas that are emerging in the field. We are, through our very nature, able to be nimble, and we are arm's length. So we realize, and this is a wonderful conversation that we've been having over the last month or so, that we need to rise above regional politics, and that the concerns of artists and arts workers and arts organizations who are working in cities, they comprise a huge percentage of the concerns of the sector overall. The local concerns, such as advocating for fair and equitable reopening guidelines, for instance, also have ramifications nationally. We know from the past that we have an ability to forge collaborations on the ground, but also provincially and nationally. For instance, the major collaboration of CADAC, the arts database you all love to fill in, actually started in Toronto at the municipal level. So we do, respectfully speaking, we need to change the existing formula regarding consultations. Currently, municipal funders do listen very carefully, and we respond to provincial and federal funding policies. But this doesn't necessarily go the other way, despite our remarkable listening apparatus at the grassroots level. So I do think there is a lot of energy amongst us to help the sector move forward over the coming months and year. Back to you.
That's interesting, and I hear Sanjay saying again very clearly that you need to be at the table, and I wonder what that looks like. If you're not at the table, why aren't you, and what does that look like? Patty, maybe we can just we begin with you. Maybe we could close with your remarks, and then open it up to the floor to our summit members for questions. And those questions will be coming through, and the Business and Arts team will be sending them through me, and I will convey them to you. But Patty, what does collective action look like on go forward?
Thanks very much, Nichole. I think as you've heard from all of us, the context that we come from by being in our cities, we are obviously city-centered. And then as Sanjay said, when a good chunk of our funds come through municipal tax dollars, we're also citizen-centered. And my colleagues in Calgary will feel like I'm a broken record because I describe CADA as a public agency stewarding public dollars in the interest of the public good. And by the way, that includes artists. And artists pay rent, they pay the same amount, they pay the same for a liter of gas, they encounter the same challenges that any other citizen in Calgary would encounter. So for CADA, as much as ours is about advocating for the things that the artists bring to a community, right? The power of the arts and the power of artists to build community, it's as much about what artists need in order to fulfill and realize that benefit in community. So when things like basic income, fair and equitable opening protocols coming out of COVID, understanding the context behind various policy decisions at provincial and federal levels, that falls on us to communicate to our communities on the ground every day on a consistent basis. So that's the opportunity. There is strength in numbers. And for us, we actually represent those numbers in a very significant and meaningful way. And that isn't to denigrate or change whatever the nature of the relationships are at the provincial and the federal level. It's hard to replace in real life, as we are all encountering right now. It's hard to think about this summit here versus in Banff. When you're all together, when we're all together. That's what we get the great privilege of doing every day within our communities. And I think there's going to be a real power to that. And that as the municipal funders, we can bring that context to any table in quite a meaningful way. And to Claire's point, ensuring that kind of conduit where as much as we try to ensure alignment to federal and provincial policy, it would be really great to have that alignment coming from our friends in those other two orders to the municipal level as well, because this is where we see, I talk about small experiments with radical intent. The cities is where we can try that stuff out and learn on the ground in real time. And that's going to be a tremendous opportunity for us in this time of transformational change. So I guess my ask of everybody here today is, as much as we will advocate and champion on behalf of all of you individually and in groups, we also ask for you to advocate for us as the municipalities. The increase in funds that we saw from the Canada Council or at the federal level were fantastic. In that same period of time, the 4 cities you see represented here all saw increases to our budgets as well. We can make a difference on the ground. And so with that, I would welcome any questions that people have. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Patty. And I'm looking for more questions as they come in. I've had a couple come through. I just want to give people a bit more time to submit a few more questions. On this note of working together as local councils, have you set a formal structure among the four of you, or has this been an organic process for you?
It started out, I mean, a long time ago, as a desire to work with colleagues, and we had so many things we could learn from each other. But the fact that we collaborated on the op-ed made it mandatory that we actually organize meetings in a regular way. So we don't have an official charter yet, but we are committed to having regular meetings and let the actions, the mutual and shared actions. And I wanted to also note that Winnipeg Arts Council is also part of this group, representing the largest municipal arts councils in the country. And of course, in our discussions, we will also invite other colleagues like Vancouver, which doesn't have an arts council, but of course, which represents a huge number of artists.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes absolute sense that you be plugged in with the broader conversations that are happening around funding in the arts, since we heard a lot about innovation and funding agencies needing to change. The Canada Council presentation with Jesse and Simon was very telling. They did touch on basic income. Simon's point seemed to be that where there is power within the Canada Council is to advocate for public policy in that area versus being the agency that would take care of basic income guarantee. Is that where you feel as municipal leaders, funding leaders, is that sort of the direction you're going as well?
Well, I think you saw, Nichole, in the op-ed piece that we all jointly submitted, yes. And again, to this notion of, we talk so much about the role that the arts and artists can contribute. I heard Dr. Bell yesterday say, you know, for Canadians to live the life we want to live, we need artists, we need the arts. And it's like that comes at a cost. And the cost is a basic income guarantee to ensure that we create the conditions for artists to live their most creative lives and not have to worry about where rent is coming from next month or at the end of this month, which is like tomorrow or 2 days from now. So certainly from Calgary Arts Development's perspective, we will continue to champion, and I'm thrilled that we can do so alongside our colleagues around this table.
Fantastic. So I do have a couple of questions we can move to now from our stakeholders. One directed to Patty, actually. Given the recent Canada Council presentation about innovation and sustainability as key themes for the sector, can Patty share some lessons and learnings from the organizational structural grants that Calgary Arts Development launched this year?
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. Hi, Camilla. We launched this program in February, so it's still very, very new. And at the time, we thought it was going to be a one-year program. And pretty quickly, we learned it is not a one-year program. We will now embed it as a regular program. And our approach is really one size fits one. And it comes from honoring all of the work that all of you on this organization, as you are the caretakers of your organization, of the practice, the artistic practice that you are engaged in. And that when we looked at organizations in the past who either made that very difficult decision to close or to make a significant shift, you did it by yourself, alone, because of fear, because of being perceived as failing. And from our perspective, that was wrong. And as a public funder, again, if I don't honor all that you have committed before coming to this crossroad, then I think we're doing a disservice. So we designed this program to walk with organizations who find themselves having difficult conversations, and it isn't always about closing. Collaborating or merging or fundamentally changing your business model, those are not easy either. And so we wanted to at least extend the willingness on our part to walk with you in confidence. So our officers sign non-disclosure agreements with the organizations who apply, so that you won't hear from us. And we want to give you assurance that you can be as open and as honest as you need to be. We customize the fit of the investment to what you tell us your needs are. And we want to be with you. And, you know, and I guess simplistically, maybe, I don't know who the companies are, but I know we've had about 20 reach out to us. They're at various stages of conversation with our team. There are a handful that are actually in the application process stage. And you know, we'll see what comes of it. But I want to give assurance that we don't have a predetermined kind of end for what that is. And I guess the other thing I would say is that this program, you know, for years, we've all talked about the arts ecosystem, right? Well, if it's really an ecosystem, we've spent a lot of time on new growth. We haven't actually addressed what happens to the old growth that actually has to give way. And by old, I don't mean those who've been here longest. I don't mean the biggest trees. I don't mean any of that. We know in an ecosystem, it happens throughout the system. So I hope this program begins to acknowledge and articulate that need in a healthy ecosystem. And we want to be with you in that part of the journey as well. Thanks.
That's very interesting. It's always a challenge to figure out how to broaden the pool. But there is a big opportunity now, as you say, for a sort of graceful exit or a merger, a collaboration. Absolutely. Now that we have a question that's come in for Sean, higher level budget concerns. The current budget is focused on emergency and immediate recovery needs. The question says, how do we advocate for the systemic issues with respect to longer term viability? Should we be advocating for being at the table for the longer term needs to support arts and culture beyond these next 2 to 3 years? Over to you,
Thanks,
Sean.
Howard, for the question. And again, I think it's an important one. And before I answer it, since I got to be the first one off with the presentation, just want to thank Sarah and the entire Canadian Arts Coalition for all their support, and for Patty, Sanjay, Natalie, and Claire. Again, from a federal level, we do a lot of advocacy. Sometimes we lose sight of the great work that's being done at the municipal level. And you guys should all be applauded to the highest levels for the concerted efforts that you put forward on the universal basic income. Bravo on that front. So just to answer your question, Howard, and I tried to allude to it in the presentation, if this was normal times, whatever normal times look like, we would have been in a situation where we would have had 8 program reviews, which showed, you know, from 2019 on, programs that are vastly oversubscribed. And you would have been looking for those permanent funding opportunities. We're now going into a situation with the investments and significant strategic investments that have been made by the government of Canada to try to get into that conversation of what the reality of the sector looks like as we try to build forward, as organizations that have had maybe more challenging times than others coming out of the pandemic try to come back better. And you're in a situation where you've been, I'll call it artificially supported in terms of the pandemic supports, and you need to build that base of existing programs to support not only yourselves as existing organizations, but all the new organizations that are going to want to come in. And you don't want to get into a situation where, you know, because of the investments that have been made coming out of the pandemic to build back better and build back stronger, that you have all of these new organizations coming in saying, I'd like a seat at the funding table, and we're working on 2019 dollars that have to be spread even thinner now, and with no real plan coming out. And I think that's where the opportunity arises. And again, The Broadcasting Act, if you say it to most organizations in this sector, they're like, okay, that's film and TV and music. To me, that's $830 million of new money that's going to come into the sector, into the arts and culture sector. And if as a sector, we want to say, okay, yeah, film, TV, music, you take it all, then we're going to be sitting in the same problem. But if we say, listen, we are arts creators around the table. If this is an investment in culture, we need to be at the table and we need to be a part of that funding conversation. When I look at that amount of money and realize it's 3 times the size of the Telefilm and the Canada Media Fund combined, that's an interesting conversation to want to be part of.
Interesting. Now we have a question that's come in from another arts council, regional arts council, wondering how to increase visibility with other federal funders, and some advice on how can funders engage grassroots arts organizations and artists so that the relationship feels more reciprocal? So how have you nurtured those relationships? How have you garnered visibility? I know many of you, obviously all of you, have worked very closely with all levels of government. Any advice for other regional funders out there? And we can start with Nathalie, perhaps. Nathalie.
So did I understand correctly?
Oui, c'est comment les conseils peuvent augmenter leur visibilité avec d'autres gouvernements fédéraux. C'est une question qui vient d'un membre d'un conseil qui est plus régional, plus petit. Et la deuxième partie de la question, c'était comment établir ces relations-là que tu as expliquées, est tellement profonde. Comment est-ce que les conseillers peuvent établir ces relations-là avec une profondeur que tu as expliqué tout à l'heure?
So if I understand correctly, there's 2 things. First of all, we all have the problem, depend federal, provincial, or municipal for that the people know what we are doing and how. I need about communication. Pour moi, c'est un problème qu'on entend constamment. Les gens, on le sait de façon coast to coast, tout ce qui est les communications et la visibilité qui est donnée au secteur de la culture est en chute libre depuis de nombreuses années. Je pense que cette importance-là de travailler ensemble, et je suis contente que Sean en a parlé tantôt, de justement la publication du revenu minimum garanti. Qui nous a unis, Patty, Sanjay, Claire et moi. Ça, c'est un exemple de ce qu'on a constaté rapidement. C'est que nos systèmes, au niveau municipal, provincial, fédéral, fonctionnent relativement bien. Ce qu'on a tous constaté rapidement, c'est l'artiste lui-même qui se retrouvait dans une situation extrêmement vulnérable. C'est lui qui était le plus fragilisé. Donc, cette notion-là, pour moi, de concertation, de collaboration, elle est fondamentale et il faut aller au plus petit dénominateur commun. It's important what I say now. We need to go to the smallest and the grassroots it's possible to understand correctly what's happening now and not to be too far from what's happening. Et en ce sens-là, about our governance, on travaille avec les gens, on a tous des territoires quand même grands et on s'assure de travailler avec des gens. Nous, par exemple, on a presque 80 personnes impliquées dans l'organisation qui sont avec nous pendant 3 ans. Ils sont de tous les quartiers, toutes les disciplines, ils sont constamment là pour nous expliquer qu'est-ce qui arrive, c'est quoi les enjeux. Et donc, comme Patty l'a dit, on a mis en place des initiatives et des programmes pour répondre à ces réalités-là, même de petits territoires qui étaient très ponctuels sur des enjeux qui concernent les villes. Donc, pour moi, c'est 2 trucs qu'on doit retenir, c'est-à-dire que les communications ces enjeux-là, pour moi, sont les mêmes partout. Il faut travailler mieux ensemble. Et la deuxième chose, c'est l'importance, encore une fois, de ce grassroots-là pour mieux saisir les enjeux qui vont s'en venir parce que ça part de haut et ça tombe tranquillement pour en arriver. Puis plutôt, c'est l'inverse. Je pense qu'il faut partir de mieux comprendre le bas pour nous assurer que les structures puissent être encore plus solidifié.
Interesting point too. It feels that all of you are very, you put a lot of weight in listening to grassroots, understanding what's happening at the grassroots level. To Nathalie's point, to understanding not top down, but what's there within the grassroots to really understand how to respond as funders. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that notion before we go to the final question? I know all of you do it so well. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes remaining. I'm just going to, there's this last one here. Question that is probably best for Sarah. Something that has not been referenced is the recent movement on disbursement quotas for foundations, which have been proposed between 5 and 10%. This is a good question. Currently 3.5%. Is there action on the part of the Canadian Arts Summit on this file, which will be material for charitable organizations receiving funding from major and family foundations?
Quick answer is we haven't done anything about that. The second piece of that answer is we need to, because there are some real challenges with that piece in terms of what can actually sustain the level of funding in those foundations if you increase the disbursement level too high in a very low interest environment. So that is something that came up in conversation yesterday, and we'll need to look at it. There are a range of things, as people may be aware, that have been looked at to increase the level of charitable giving over the years that the Summit has certainly championed, and the Coalition as well. And I just read through the Senate's report with some recommendations. They're looking at a pilot to see if, in fact, it's a good idea to allow private shares of private corporations to be given, something that we've been going for a very long time. So there are some issues coming out of that we need to take a look at, but we always need to be mindful of things that come up, and that disbursement one is quite a recent one that we need to really look at.
Fantastic. Well, I think we have to conclude with that final question. I just want to thank all of you. It's so lovely to see all of you, and I can't wait till we can see each other in person. I also want to shout out to the amazing Business and Arts team. Honestly, I'm so proud to see this summit online and working so well. To the whole team, congratulations, and look forward to seeing you in person soon. Merci encore, Nathalie. Bye-bye.
Thank you all of you.
Bye. Thank you.